There is a difference between being wanted and being chosen. Most men never learn it. They spend their entire lives mistaking attention for value, mistaking availability for worth, mistaking being someone's option for being someone's choice. An option is convenient. An option is what you settle for when nothing better is around. An option waits by the phone. An option rearranges his entire life around someone else's hesitation. A first choice is different. A first choice is a man so clear in his own value, so rooted in his own standards, so undeniable in his presence, that choosing him isn't a compromise. It's obvious. The Stoics never wrote directly about dating. But they wrote, extensively, about something far more important, about what makes a man valuable in the first place. And it turns out, the very same principles that built emperors, generals, and philosophers are the exact principles that make a man impossible to overlook. This is inner steel. And today, you're going to learn what it actually takes to become someone's first choice, not just an option. Let's begin. Point 1. Fire. The sculptor who refused to rush. In ancient Athens, there was a sculptor named Phidias, considered one of the greatest artists of his era. He was once commissioned to create a statue for a temple, a piece that would be viewed by thousands. Partway through the work, an impatient patron visited his workshop and asked why progress seemed so slow. "Other sculptors finish in half the time," the patron said. Phidias replied calmly. "Other sculptors finish in half the time because they make half a statue. I am not making half of anything." He continued his work, meticulous, deliberate, refusing to be rushed by someone else's impatience. And when the statue was finally finished, it became one of the most celebrated works of the ancient world. People didn't remember how long it took. They remembered that it was extraordinary. The lesson: a man who rushes his own development becomes half a man. Most men trying to be chosen make the same mistake Phidias refused to make. They rush. They skip the slow, unglamorous work of building genuine character, genuine discipline, genuine depth, and instead reach for shortcuts. The right words. The right image. The right performance. And it shows. Because half-finished men are easy to see through. There's a hollowness underneath the performance that becomes obvious the moment things get difficult, the moment the relationship requires depth instead of charm. A woman who has any self-respect can sense the difference between a man who has done the slow work on himself and a man who is improvising his way through life, hoping nobody looks too closely. The Stoics called this process ascesis, disciplined practice, the deliberate, patient training of the self. Not a single dramatic transformation, but thousands of small, consistent choices, repeated over years, that build something real. Marcus Aurelius didn't become the philosopher-emperor overnight. He trained his mind daily, for decades, through journals, through discipline, through relentless self-examination, long before anyone but his closest circle ever knew his name. Practice this. Stop looking for the fast version of yourself. Stop trying to perform value before you've built it. Do the slow work, physically, mentally, financially, emotionally, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. Because the finished statue speaks for itself. It never needs to convince anyone of what it is. Subscribe CTA. If this is already resonating, subscribe to Inner Steel right now. This channel exists to help you build the kind of self that doesn't need to convince anyone of its worth. Hit subscribe and let's begin. Nut and bolt. Point 2. Fire. The lighthouse that never chased the ships. There's an old story about a lighthouse keeper on a remote, rocky stretch of coastline. Ships would pass in the night, some near, some far, some never coming close enough to see the light at all. And every single night, sailors who needed guidance would look toward the shore and find it, steady, unmoving, exactly where it had always been. The lighthouse never moved toward the ships. It never dimmed itself to seem less intimidating. It never flickered uncertainly, hoping a passing vessel might notice it. It simply stood, bright, consistent, unchanging, and let the ships come to it, navigate by it, depend on it. The ships that needed it found it. The ships that didn't, sailed on, and the lighthouse didn't move an inch to chase them. The lesson: A man chasing validation has already lost the thing he's chasing. This is one of the hardest truths for most men to accept, because chasing feels active. It feels like effort. It feels like doing something to earn the outcome you want. But chasing, constant texting, constant reassurance seeking, constant adjusting yourself based on her mood, her interest level, her responsiveness, signals exactly the opposite of what you're trying to communicate. It signals scarcity. It signals that your sense of self depends on her attention. It signals, unmistakably, that you are an option desperately trying to become a choice, rather than a man so secure in his own value that the outcome doesn't define him. Epictetus taught his students to draw a hard line between what is within their control and what is not. Her interest, her timing, her choices, none of that is yours to control. What is yours? Your consistency. Your standards. Your presence. Your discipline in not abandoning your own life to monitor hers. A lighthouse doesn't need the ship to validate that it's a lighthouse. It simply is one, and the right ships find their way by it naturally, without it ever needing to leave the shore. Practice this. The next time you feel the urge to chase, to send the extra text, to monitor her online status, to bend your plans around uncertain signals, stop. Return to your own foundation. Keep building your own life with the same intensity regardless of her response. The right person finds the light. You don't need to run toward every ship that passes. Point 3. Fire. The general who never negotiated from fear. During a tense standoff in ancient military history, a general was approached by an enemy envoy who tried to pressure him into an unfavorable agreement, hinting that if he didn't comply quickly, the opportunity for peace would vanish entirely. The general listened calmly, then said, "If this is truly my only opportunity, then perhaps it was never an opportunity worth having. I do not bargain with men who require my fear to negotiate." He didn't react. He didn't rush to comply out of anxiety that the moment would slip away. And remarkably, because he held his position, calm and unmoved, the terms that eventually emerged were far more favorable than the ones presented under pressure. The lesson: scarcity-based pressure only works on men who believe they have no other options. This single principle separates options from first choices more clearly than almost anything else. An option believes, somewhere in his core, that this person, this specific relationship, this specific outcome, is his only shot. And that belief makes him desperate. It makes him say yes to things he shouldn't. It makes him abandon his standards the moment they're tested. It makes him available on her terms, at her convenience, because he's terrified that if he doesn't comply, he'll lose his only chance. A first choice operates from an entirely different internal place. Not arrogance, abundance. The quiet, grounded understanding that his life, his standards, and his worth do not depend on any single outcome. He wants the relationship to work. But he doesn't need it to in order to feel like a man. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy in the modern sense, but freedom from being controlled by destructive, irrational emotional reactions, particularly fear. A man ruled by the fear of losing something will always negotiate from weakness. A man who has built a life solid enough that no single loss could collapse it negotiates, and lives, from strength. Seneca wrote, "He who fears he will be poor is dependent on his fear, since wealth becomes a chain that fear forges." The same is true of relationships. The fear of being alone, of losing this particular person, of missing this particular window, becomes a chain. And chains make terrible foundations for love. Practice this. Build a life, friendships, purpose, discipline, financial stability, physical strength, so solid that no single relationship outcome could collapse it. Not as a strategy to attract anyone. As the actual foundation of being a man worth choosing in the first place. Point 4. Fire. The vase with the hidden crack. A merchant once sold 2 vases that looked, from the outside, nearly identical. Both beautifully painted. Both elegant in shape. Both priced the same. One was solid throughout, fired correctly, structurally sound. The other had a hairline crack near its base, invisible unless you looked closely, the result of being rushed through the kiln before it was ready. Both vases sat on shelves for months, admired equally by passers-by. Then a storm came through the village. Strong winds, a shaking shelf. The solid vase wobbled, but held. The cracked one shattered completely the moment real pressure was applied. The lesson: charm and image can make two men look identical from a distance. Only pressure reveals which one was actually solid. Plenty of men can be charming. Plenty of men can say the right things on a first date, present an attractive image online, perform confidence in low-stakes moments. From a distance, they look remarkably similar to genuinely strong men. But relationships, real ones, apply pressure eventually. Disagreements. Hard conversations. Moments of stress, disappointment, uncertainty, vulnerability. And it's in those moments that the difference becomes undeniable. A man who has only built the surface, the charm, the image, the performance, cracks under that pressure. He becomes defensive, withdrawn, reactive, manipulative, or collapses into anxious reassurance-seeking. The crack that was always there, invisible during easy times, finally shows itself. A man who has done the deeper work, who has built actual emotional regulation, actual integrity, actual security, holds steady. Not perfectly. Not without struggle. But steady enough to be trusted with the weight of real intimacy. Marcus Aurelius wrote about exactly this kind of internal solidity. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He understood that pressure isn't something to avoid in the pursuit of appearing strong, it's the very thing that reveals, and ultimately builds, real strength. Practice this. Stop optimizing for how you appear in easy, low-pressure moments. Start deliberately strengthening how you respond under real pressure, your patience in conflict, your composure under stress, your honesty when honesty is uncomfortable. Because eventually, every vase gets tested by a storm. Build the kind that holds. Point 5. Fire. The king who refused to compete for a crown he already wore. There's a recorded moment in royal history where a king, secure in his rule, was approached by advisors urging him to engage in a public contest with a rival noble, a display of wealth, of strength, of status, designed to prove, once and for all, who deserved more respect. The king declined. A man who already wears the crown does not need to win a contest to prove he's the king, he said. Only a man uncertain of his own position needs the audience's verdict. His refusal to compete, oddly, earned him more respect than the contest ever could have. People sensed something rare in a man who didn't need to prove anything, because what he had was simply, obviously true. The lesson: a man who has to constantly prove his value has already revealed that he doubts it. This shows up everywhere in modern dating and relationships. Men comparing themselves to other men, trying to outtext, outspend, outimpress, constantly performing value in hopes that the performance will be convincing enough. But genuine value doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to win a contest against every other man she's ever dated. It doesn't need flashy declarations or constant proof. It simply exists, demonstrated through consistency, integrity, and presence over time, and the right person eventually sees it clearly, without needing to be convinced. The Stoics drew a sharp distinction between what they called external goods, wealth, status, reputation, the opinions of others, and internal goods, character, wisdom, virtue, self-mastery. External goods can be compared, ranked, competed over. Internal goods cannot. There is no contest for who has more integrity. There is no ranking for who has more self-respect. These things simply are, or are not, present in a man, and their presence speaks for itself without needing an audience to confirm it. A man secure in his internal goods doesn't feel the need to compete with every other option she might have. He's not threatened by comparison because his sense of worth was never built on being better than, in the first place. It was built on being aligned with his own values, which makes the entire concept of competition almost irrelevant. Practice this. The next time you feel the urge to compete, to prove, to perform value in front of someone, pause. Ask yourself, am I demonstrating who I actually am, or am I trying to win a contest I don't need to enter? The king who already wears the crown never needs to fight for it. Subscribe CTA. If you're serious about becoming the kind of man whose value speaks for itself, Inner Steel is built for you. Subscribe right now. This community is growing, and it's growing with the right people. Nut and bolt. Point 6. Fire. The gardener and the wildflower. A gardener once spent years trying to force a particular flower to bloom in soil that simply wasn't suited for it. He watered it constantly, adjusted the sunlight, changed the fertilizer, begged it, in his own quiet way, to grow the way he needed it to. It never thrived. It survived barely, in a constant state of struggle. One day, walking through a nearby field, he noticed a wildflower of the same species growing effortlessly, vibrant, full, thriving without any effort at all, simply because it had found soil that actually suited it. He realized, finally, that the problem had never been the flower. It had been his refusal to accept that some things cannot be forced into thriving where they don't belong. The lesson: you cannot become someone's first choice by forcing yourself into soil that was never meant for you. This is one of the most liberating truths a man can learn, and one of the hardest to accept, especially when he's emotionally invested in a specific outcome. Sometimes a man does everything right, builds himself, shows up with consistency, demonstrates real character, and it still doesn't work with a particular person. Not because he failed. Not because he wasn't enough. But because that particular soil was simply never suited for that particular flower. Compatibility, timing, mutual readiness, these things matter enormously, and no amount of personal development can force a fundamentally mismatched fit into thriving. The Stoics had a phrase for this kind of acceptance: amor fati, love of fate. Not passive resignation, but an active, clear-eyed embrace of reality as it actually is, rather than how you wish it were. A man practicing amor fati doesn't waste years forcing a wilting situation to bloom out of sheer stubbornness. He reads the reality clearly, accepts it without bitterness, and redirects his energy towards soil where his particular nature can actually thrive. This is not the same as giving up on yourself or lowering your standards. It's the opposite. It's having enough self-respect to recognize when continuing to force a mismatch is actually a form of self-abandonment, choosing struggle and rejection over the dignity of finding where you're actually wanted. Practice this. If you find yourself constantly forcing, constantly struggling, constantly contorting yourself to fit somewhere that resists you at every turn, consider, honestly, whether the problem is your effort or the soil itself. The wildflower in the field never had to force anything. It simply found where it belonged, and thrived there, effortlessly. Point 7.